overnight. Special counsel Jack Smith claims there was enough evidence to convict Donald Trump at trial for his actions on January 6, 2021, and says that Trump has not been exonerated for his actions surrounding that day. Smith's parting words, released overnight by Attorney General Merrick Garland, part of a sweeping 130-page report from Smith's criminal investigation, as well as a letter that Smith wrote to Garland dated January 7th. The report doesn't have extensive new details from the more than 250 witnesses they interviewed, but it represents a sweeping defense of the department's case against President Trump and the landmark decision to charge him with crimes and prosecute him even as he ran for president again. In the letter, Smith writes this, quote, "I want to be clear that the ultimate decision to bring charges against Mr. Trump was mine. It is a decision I stand behind fully. To have done otherwise on the facts developed during our work would have been to shirk my duties as a prosecutor and as a public servant." And in the letter, Smith takes on Trump directly over Trump's repeated claims of, quote, complete exoneration, end quote, because the government ultimately dropped the case. Smith writes that Trump's claims that, quote, dismissal of his criminal cases signifies Mr. Trump's complete exoneration, that is false. The report itself outlines how President-elect Trump sought to overturn the 2020 election results in several ways, including putting pressure on state election officials to throw out the results.
So, look, all I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have, because we won the state.
Smith also outlined Trump's efforts to pressure his own vice president, Mike Pence. Those efforts culminating on January 6th, 2021, after Trump addressed a crowd of his supporters before many of them marched on the Capitol to disrupt the transfer of power. Smith recounts several events from that day, including when Trump sat back at the White House, watching rioters attack the Capitol while sitting in the Oval Office dining room. While they're alone, he sent off a tweet. Rioters then read it out loud in almost real time with a bullhorn.
My kids didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country and our Constitution, giving states a chance to certify a corrected set of facts, not the fraudulent or inaccurate ones which they were asked to previously certify. U.S. demands the truth.
In the conclusion of that report, Jack Smith writes that he believes the facts and law supported his team's findings against Trump, but only the 2024 election derailed the prosecution. Smith writes this, quote, "Indeed, but for Mr. Trump's election and imminent return to the presidency, the office assessed that the admissible evidence was sufficient to obtain and sustain a conviction at trial." Donald Trump's lawyers attempted to keep the report under wraps, but that was ultimately rejected by the courts. Trump himself responded directly to the report on social media overnight. He wrote this in part, quote, "Jack is a lame-brained prosecutor who was unable to get his case tried before the election, which I won in a landslide. The voters have spoken." Our panel's here to discuss. Stephen Collinson, CNN Politics senior reporter; Elliot Williams, CNN legal analyst, former federal prosecutor; Kate Bedingfield, CNN political commentator, former Biden White House communications director; and Brad Todd, CNN political commentator and a Republican strategist. Welcome to all of you. Thank you all for being here. Stephen Collinson, I actually want to start with you as we think about the big picture here, because Donald Trump is correct. The voters have spoken. All of those things that we just saw play out, they happened, and the voters said, perhaps they didn't say we don't care about that, but they said, we care about other things more. We want to send you back to the Oval Office. This reads to me as a sweeping defense by Jack Smith of how the department conducted itself in dealing with this matter. How do you read it?
Yes, and I think it shows why the president-elect was so keen for none of this to come out before the election. And it's sobering when you think that the person who allegedly committed these acts will next week swear an oath to uphold the Constitution. Just because we knew a lot of this stuff, we've seen it play out many times, it doesn't mean it's any less shocking. And while I think millions of Trump's supporters are justified in being jubilant that he will return to power next week, this explains why so many people will see this as a moment of fear and trepidation.
Elliot, how do you understand it as the lawyer that you are, a person who has worked inside the department? They clearly, Jack Smith is also under pressure, right? He has left, he's separated from the Justice Department, but Trump has suggested that he may go after him in some way. What do you think, especially this letter that accompanied the report was, I thought, particularly striking?
The letter was particularly striking. So back up. What is the purpose of a special counsel report? The law says that whenever a special counsel does his or her work, he must submit or she must submit a report to the Attorney General detailing the reasons for why they either chose to prosecute, would have prosecuted, or did not. All these questions, to some extent, even what Stephen was talking about the politics behind it, don't matter, at least for the purposes of the report. It's laying out, these are the crimes that we think were committed, and this was all of the evidence that we think did so. And that's there. I mean, it's clear that regardless of what anyone thinks of Jack Smith or Donald Trump, evidence was there to convict on any number of offenses, including conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding. Now, to this question of that letter, it was really interesting because all the cover letter had to be was just a statement of, Mr. Attorney General, here's our work and here's what we did. But it really was a defense, almost in a defensive way, of the work of the people of the special counsel's office. This is why we did what we did and who we are.
Yeah, Brad Todd, how do you consider all of this? I mean, every time I go back to that day, that footage is incredibly jarring. And yet here we are. In 6 days, Donald Trump's going to be inaugurated.
Well, the way Donald Trump conducted himself in the aftermath of the 2020 election, in particular on January 6th, made him rightfully less popular than he's ever been in his entire political career, which is saying something. It was an overhang in the Republican primary. It's why Ron DeSantis started out 20 points ahead of him. It's because a lot of Republicans, a lot of Trump's own supporters, did not approve of how he conducted himself in the wake of the 2020 election. However, the prosecutors overshot, and it's not just Jack Smith, it's also Alvin Bragg. They overshot, and the public made a decision on Election Day that perhaps Donald Trump was not near the threat that continued Democrat governance was. Some of that's on Jack Smith. Some of that's on Alvin Bragg for biting off more than they could chew, for moving too slowly, for not getting a conviction that would stand up with public scrutiny. So I view this today as mainly a PR report by Jack Smith. There's not going to be a competing report from the defense in this case. That's not how this works. So this is, and there's not much new that the American public's going to be surprised by here.
You know, I just on the worst possible thing that Jack Smith had was Fani Willis, Alvin Bragg, and all of the state prosecutors, because the strongest potential cases against Donald Trump were the ones Jack Smith was bringing, particularly the one in Florida, where
even there he overshot.
But again, look at the conspiracy statute and tell me he overshot. The law is pretty clear on that one. It's just there's a mess of all these really political state prosecutors. He didn't just bring the
charge he could win on. He brought more, which gave Donald Trump time to chip the clock. That's his fault.
Had it just been obstruction of justice, he's convicted like that.
I think, it's certainly true that the election results in November indicate that the politics of this moment, Trump has been victorious in the politics of this moment, but he's also about to take office again. He will be president for 4 years. He will have access to the levers of power that could potentially allow him to do something like this again. So it is important that this information be out in the public record, be laid out and detailed in this way when we're potentially looking at the possibility of Trump committing these kinds of acts again. And so I think I would disagree that it is solely a PR document, because I think it does lay an important predicate for this man who's about to take office and have his hands on the levers of power again.
The public knows this. I want to give the public credit. The public knows all of these things. They hold it against Donald Trump. They decided Democrats were a bigger threat this time.
And I think that the way that Jack Smith and Merrick Garland proceeded on all of this, timing-wise, I think there are a lot of questions that can be asked about that.
That's what I was going to ask you about specifically, because it's not just Donald Trump and the right that Jack Smith seems to address in this letter and in this report. He also defends himself against some of these charges on the left that it took too long, right? Yeah. He kind of goes into great detail about these are the ways in which they delayed. We had to spend months convincing, or going to court to get Mike Pence to testify, among other things. But I mean, how much blame do you put on the Justice Department? Because Democrats seem to to lay quite a bit of blame for the delays at Democrats' feet.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think if you look back over the course of these 4 years, I think there are certainly moments where it is easy to argue that Garland and then Smith should have moved more quickly. I'm certainly not a lawyer. I obviously respect the challenges that Jack Smith had in moving forward legally in the process. I understand you can't just wave a wand and compel Mike Pence to
it says
testify.
in the letter at one point,
But-
well, we'll get it
but-
done by the summer of 23, and that'll be well in advance of the election. As a
Right.
political reporter, I'm like, that's not in the
It's
advance of
not.
the election. That is
Right.
the middle
But
of the
here's-
election.
But the other thing that I think the other overlay that we have to remember from a political perspective, and we've talked about this before, but when Biden came into office, one of the things he had campaigned on was the idea of restoring norms, restoring the idea of an independent Justice Department, and so there was a prevailing political sense that that Biden should not, and his administration should not in any way be seen as putting their thumb on the scale here to try to move things forward. So this is one of those questions where it's sort of easy to sit in this moment and for Democrats to say it should have moved more quickly, it should have moved more quickly. But there were countervailing political imperatives when Biden came into office, that I think he was trying to adhere to.